Good day, everybody. Brian here on November 1st. I wanted to do a mini encapsulated review opinion on this book that I just read on C++ a few weeks ago. I mentioned this is the book I'm going to use as a reference to relearn C++ because I was up to maybe 11, 14. But as I said in past videos, you kind of want to work off of 17, especially if you are trying to follow the steps of what high frequency trading firms use. Majority of them right now, if you look at job descriptions, will always mention 17, but quite a few of them are porting over to version 20. So I've followed the version 17. Eventually, I'll make my way into version 20, but generally, the differences between 14, 17 is minor, but there's quite a lot of new features that you'll find in version 17 code uh, that I wouldn't be surprised a lot of firms are using. So let's get through this. I wanted to kind of go through each section by a chapter and just go through just to give you an overview of my opinion on all of this and how it works. Number one is if you're new to programming, is this book recommended? Kinda, but it does go very deep and very technical about different methodologies and memory and the like. I think if you're really brand new to programming, you probably want to start with uh, Python. Python will cover a lot of the topics from the programming aspect from here. And then if you need to get into speedy, optimal memory handling and the like, this is where C++ is really good. And in terms of if you're just starting from zero knowledge with this book, I think the C++ will overwhelm you. So as I said, you're better off to start with Python. Okay, so moving into that, the this kind of comes out really hard hitting on the different types of data analysis. So again, if you're new to programming, this will probably be a showstopper for you because you're not picking up a lot of the basics when it comes to programming. Chapter two, again, the different types of data. Um, this can most likely will overwhelm you. Uh, so, for example, covering things like octal literals, binary literals. To be honest, it's not so much stressed in the world of Python versus C++. So those type of topics, you won't see a whole lot in Python, so it won't overwhelm you. But these are important topics in the world of C++, learning how to properly handle data to avoid any form of crashes unnecessarily with C++. So again, if you're new, start with Python. All right, so all this octal literal assignment operation, all the basics, OP equals, these are things you won't see a whole lot of in Python. Size of is an important one when it comes to um, C++. All of these sort of things are important to know as well, just the basics of programming, mathematical functions and the like, and the conversions again. Uh, if you really wanted to put the time in, I'd probably recommend learning Python, then C, and then C++, because C is it's a basically a no frill, uh, more on the bare metal of learning programming and then move up into C++ because it just really depends on um, how motivated you are in terms of wanting to learn high frequency trading. I think if you go from Python and then C, a C book, like just the basic standard uh, book of like Kerningham and Ritchie C, that's really good to start from, and then you'll get a really decent respect for the language of C. This book kind of intermingles C as well, so that might overwhelm you. But again, if you're coming from Python to C++, this should kind of get you through. Um, but if you really want to avoid the confusion, I'd probably go the path of Python C and then C++. Just my way of thinking, because when it comes to modern C++, from C++ 11 to 14, that's kind of more confusing, especially when it comes to things like pointers, and just even doing things like new and delete in C++, which doesn't exist in C. It's gonna, again, overwhelm you, confuse you, whereas opposed to you learn C with the pointers on the memory management, you'll have a better respect for the language C++. But again, it depends upon how motivated you are. But I'm only saying to include C because let's face it, if you are going to go down the path of high frequency trading, you really got to know a lot about the kernel, the networking features of the Linux core, or the kernel on top of memory and optimizing the memory and just doing things like shifting and things like that. The best place to learn all that is in C, and just trying to learn that all at the same time with C++ and just jumping right into C++ is going to be a showstopper for you because you're probably going to get confused. Now, of course, this book is going to be great if you already know Python and comfortable with Python and you really know and comfortable with C. This is a great book for you. But from ground zero, I'm strongly recommending, yeah, learn C before you get into this. Chapter 3, working with fundamental data types. So you can see that there's a lot of coverage of data types, and that's because it's really important to have a respect for C++ and adding the C style within the C++ because it was a very long time uh, where a lot of the coding is using pointers and addresses with pointers. Um, and to be truthful, I think, as I said, you may struggle learning that and really trying to understand that, um, especially with things like bitwise shift operators, logical and bit pattern, because it's very important to understand when you're dealing with integers and doubles and stuff. Because when it comes to high frequency trading, you're going to have to know how to use minimal memory as possible, reduce and minimize your computing cycles, and just without that C mastery level of coding, again, you're going to miss out on a lot of what C++ or C, the language, delivers. So again, we're only on chapter 4 here. So this is now we're finally getting into the basic concepts of programming. So you can see here they put more emphasis on the data type versus the basic programming functionality on things like if or decision making, using the operators of the logical or and negation. Um, and then we have the switch, which is like the case, and that sort of thing. So again, knowing C will help you. This book really covers it very well, and it covers it even if you have zero knowledge. But I think it's really hard for me to tell you if you will be overwhelmed without knowing the C component as well, the C programming. Now, before I continue, let me show you the C book I can recommend here. Is if you go to just the simple Birmingham and Ritchie book, it's basically this book right here, which came out in the 80s. It's really basic and raw and really focuses on the data types and memory handling. This is the book you want before you get into C++. Okay. So again, they come out hard learning the complicated way of C++ on the memory handling. I think they do that on purpose instead of going the lazy modern C++ way to prevent you from relying on the lazy way, or they call it modern C++, plus plus, because I think you will, again, um, not really understanding when you start coding and debugging in C++, plus plus, you will have a lot of lonely, long, drawn out debugging processes on memories if something crashes, or just properly not understanding why something may crash when it comes to data handling or memory handling, and the C compiler or C++ plus plus compiler just chokes, and you don't know why. That's one of the other reasons why you got to know the C component. So here you can see it finally gets to the for loop. And as I said before, moving into the decision with the logical operators in the previous chapter 4. So now we're on chapter 5. I might also mention that this book is about 750 pages, 760 pages with the content. So it's a fairly lengthy book. But I'm just trying to give you my opinion on it. It does cover things very well. So again, here in chapter 5, it continues with um, the the for loop, the while loop, the do while. And one thing I will say about when it comes to Python on how it uses the for loop, knowing that how that works and then applying it to the Python-like looping in C++, uh, you can see why they've added it here as well. And then here, when you're breaking out of a loop or an indefinite loop, this is where you can get hung up if you're new to coding. Again, knowing both Python and C will help you there, and then move into this, especially if you're trying to get into the HFT like way of coding. Okay. I think that's very important, especially, and then you get into arrays. And these are not arrays using the standard library. These are arrays, and using the standard library is the easy way. Using the native core arrays, we'll say non-standard library arrays, you'll get a much better appreciation, because I can probably guarantee you on the HFT front, it's really hard for me to say this, but I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of the HFT shops will use STL, non-standard library, and have their own data handling operations for optimal purposes, and they'll be um, home house built. Like they will be internal within the shop, where they're not using a lot of third-party libraries, including the STL standard library. Just so you know, that's what I'm thinking. So again, they're going to probably use arrays here outside of that. And when you see the STD colon colon, that's standard library. From what I understand, there's a mixed story if standard library is used in the high frequency trading shops. Some will use a standard library, but they're not going to use a whole lot. Boost, from what I gather, they may use some parallelism, or they may just use there's a variety of parallelism, parallelizing uh, frameworks and libraries out there, but it's really hard to say what they'll use, and most likely have their own house built library set up. So this book does not cover a lot of the parallelization. So, but the arrays, the pointers will be most likely used a lot. So moving into chapter 6, again, using the pointers and the references, passing by reference and value, that's very different. And it's kind of starting to get a little easier now on you, instead of relying more on the C-like pointers and passing by value and reference. The C style, it's more using the STL. What I said in the book, they say that the standard library is still an efficient way of coding, but there's a smarter way to prevent all the memory leakage when you're handling your own data. But I think the way this book is designed, it's really trying to emphasize the raw pointers, as you can see here, pointer notation with array name, and how to properly use it, dynamic memory allocation using pointers. So they really put emphasis on there. And obviously, they want you to go through the punishment of learning about memory leaks and deallocation and allocation. using new and delete. Um, Again, here we have raw pointers, and then it goes into the smart pointers, which is typical of the standard library. And then you get introduced to the unique pointer and shared pointer, which is better for memory handling because it's all self-contained, and those um, library calls will improve your um, memory handling. Well, it really does it for you. But still, I think you can still get into all kinds of hang-ups when it comes to the compiling. Again, this is the really cool part with Python, range-based looping in a for loop, which is going to follow a Python. So again, it helps to know Python for that. So chapter 7. Now again, like we are up to chapter, there's about 19 chapters in the book here. So it doesn't stop there. But coming back to chapter 17, then it goes on about um, strings. Again, you can use strings, which is really pointers and whatnot, but it does get easier if you're using a standard library, strings and vectors. So there's an appreciation for that. Same with setting up streams and all the other derivatives that come out of that. Defining functions. Now, again, this is very important to understand because there's different types of, um, again, this is just basic programming. Functions are both in Python and C, so it kind of helps you there. And again, knowing how to properly do it is critical when it comes to the high frequency trading to help reduce memory and minimize these computer cycles as well. So you kind of really got to understand the things like passing arguments to a function, different ways to declare by within the function, and then as I said, you got pass by value, pass by reference. What are you doing with a string, um, and things like that? And it really emphasizes that. Then there's a standard optional, and again, knowing the segregating out the C style helps you get first that appreciation and then make your life easier by using these calls from the standard library. And again, a lot of people are going to go pretty crazy on the overloading of different types of functions. When it comes to C++, there's inlining, and then also you can use using a mix of constant along with overloading on different types of operators as well. And that can get really confusing within C++. So again, when you're trying to work with a lot of the pointer style coming from the C, I think again that's where a lot of people will get stuck and probably would give up. But if again, when it comes to high frequency trading, it's about motivation and ensuring that you put the work ethic in to understand all this. Because if you're going to go through a recruiting process, they will challenge you on the C for sure. They want to see how well you know C. So it's a must have. I've personally gone through a lot of this learning C. I'm comfortable with Python, so I'm now, as I said, relearning the C++, but the more modern way of doing it. So again, as I said, template functions are again critical to help minimize your coding. And again, it just gets really crazy on the arguments, on the overloading, and when you're mixing it with the overloading and the different types of multiple parameters, and I could go on and on about what they call type deduction. Um, Sometimes a compiler does it for you, and sometimes a compiler won't do it for you. And again, your Python could crash during the compiling pro- process, and you don't know why if you don't know how to handle, again, and I've said it before, the C style stuff. Okay, chapter 10 covers the other critical process. So when it comes to C and C++, there's a compiling process, then there's a linking process of the different C files or C++ files along with their header files as well. So that's where the linking comes in to bring it all together. And back in the old day, you had a compile process, and then you call a linking process as well, like that were separate from each other. but with the new C compilers, they do both in one call using just a C compiler call with something like Visual C++. If you're using an IDE like Visual Studio or VS Code or a GCC, because the compiler does that with the linking today. Okay. So again, when you and there's many different styles of using and optimizing with header files and then obviously no different than a Python or C. Oh no, C doesn't have the namespaces, but uh, knowing it from within Python helps, and being able to kind of build out an object-oriented kind of programming paradigm helps. But I mean, it's like trying to master chess, but it's as I said with checkers, it's a simple thing to learn, but there's many different ways to play checkers, and C++ is very similar. Um, and it's hard to master this language to know how to do it optimally and efficiently, especially as I said, getting into the world of high frequency trading. Again, so they have things like nested namespaces, things that it's okay to learn. Will you use it in those kind of environments for high frequency trading? Probably not. And then you can see here standard pre-processing macros. That's used. Um, and then it gets a little bit into debugging and being able to test use case test with assert and that sort of thing. So then we get into chapter 11. If I haven't scared you, congrats for sticking it out this long. So now we're getting into chapter 11. And again, it gets really complicated by how you define your order type. So again, it introduces you to the classic object-oriented programming. If you're coming from the world of Java, this is pushed immensely. Um, and I've done Java good 9 years of it up to Java 6. So I kind of know this stuff. But then it gets into polymorphism, inheritance, constructors, default keyword and all this stuff, using different types of constructors, how to use it, using private versus public, using the this operator and how to use it properly, and then reintroducing your arrays and da 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 da. So again, very important to know. With C++, it actually makes it a lot more complicated than you could use in, let's say, Java or Python, in fact. So again, this chapter helps, but knowing the Python for object oriented from Python's something to learn. I wouldn't use Python for object oriented. It's not really built for that. It's built to be a scripting language. But C++ is built for object oriented if you want to go down that path. When it comes to HFT, talking to people, a lot of object oriented programming is not really used in C++ for HFT. It just really adds to the complexity, adds more to the coding. So when it comes to high frequency trading, they try to minimize the code. So adding an object oriented programming really just bloats the code and doesn't really minimize the computing cycles used. So again, classes, size of a class. So everything again is compacting down um, data structures, your different data objects that you're using in the world of high frequency trading. People will go out and will try to split hairs basically on timing using this type of C++ operation or style of coding to minimize their coding. It's not hardcore. Um, just so you know. Okay, operating overloading. Again, same thing. This is where it's going to introduce you to different types of functions that you can use. Again, the operating is very good for this. Things like output streams for basically printing. But there's a lot more uses for it. Arithmetic operators, again, same thing to minimize the coding uh, or computer cycles used. So arithmetic operators is helpful here when you build out a trading algorithm of some kind as well. And member versus non-member. I could go on and on about it. And again, subscript operators, um, and converting, but you can see a lot of complexities come to it. Copy assignment versus copy construction. You really have to know your stuff when it comes to being able to know what type of memory handling you should use. And again, that's not really used a whole lot in Python. Java, yes, somewhat, but when it comes to C++, it goes right down to that granular level where it makes this sort of thing makes C++ a more complicated language. But again, if you're trying to get into the world of high frequency trading, this stuff you definitely have to know. Inheritance, again, this is now part of the object oriented um, programming paradigm. Again, I'm not going to really go over that um, because it's just something you should know. Will you use it realistically in the world of high frequency trading? Maybe not. Polymorphism again, same thing. So I'm skipping here now. Okay, so this is where you have fun with C++'s runtime errors and exceptions. As I said, what I'm about to show you is the easier way to program. But if you don't know the pointers, how to manipulate the addresses of value of arrays, you will struggle because the compiler will spit out incoherent messages when it comes to bugs and whatever else, and you don't know how to handle it because it's not very intuitive. So yeah, you got this is where again that complexity of C++ comes in, and you could spend hours trying to decipher what a compiler error is going through. Sometimes it's something that you may not know, and you got to know it, especially if you go into a job environment, because you have to minimize the time on the debugging front, because obviously employers expect results, not you wasting your time and their time, and basically their cash they're paying you to solve problems. So debugging is very, very important. So you can see here they add try catch, all the different types of handling, all the different types of exceptions that are used. Python does this very well um, as well. And then there's this introduction now to the RAII for memory, better, well, basically dynamic memory. So you're not handling the memory yourself. And again, you can always hit leaks, memory leaks, no matter what. It's very common in C++, and how to get around that. And again, if you're using third-party libraries, you'll get mysterious exceptions, and that can happen a lot. And you got to know how to handle that. So this is where the optimal coding style on your functions take place with the templates, template functions, and template classes. Um, so again, you can see all the different types of ways of doing it, and this book explains this very well. So again, from a efficiency on the memory front, this book is very good. That will lead you into HFT or high frequency trading style of learning how to use this language. Okay, so you can see all the different types of again using assert, um, templates for stack numbers and da da da. I'm not going to get into that. So this is where talks about standard things of L value, R value, um, and the like. Again, that's specific to pretty well Python, C, and C, but it's really emphasized in the world um, of C++. See again here, again, where C++, the styling can contradict itself. And this book explains that fairly well. So again, it comes back to the pass by value and reference. Um, most people seem to do pass by reference. But again, are you going to apply that to an array, to a string, or just a memory, an integer type or numeric type? And all these different no exceptions when it comes to try catch and all that, and swap and memory for efficiency. I could go on, but this book pretty well explains it. So again, this is where it gets kind of more interesting for more modern programming, more modern C++. There's something called functors that help on minimizing your coding, but you got to know when to use it correctly because they say that if you use too many of that style or putting them all in your header files, it's kind of like not a best practice and it'll bloat the code when it gets compiled. So there's a smart balance to do with that. And finally, lambdas, which helps as well for expressions, which is really used for operations with algorithms. Okay. And goes pretty deep on how to handle different types of lambdas as well. And this is the last chapter as well. So this is where it's kind of getting easier using the dynamic memory instead of the raw pointer and the raw array. It's more relying on the standard library. Now, again, when it comes to the frequency and efficiency of the standard library is another story. But from what I gather, a lot of the high frequency shops will have their own ways of handling data. And those libraries are going to be, being used in house for decades. So they're going to be really reliable. And that's why a lot of these shops and firms are very conservative on moving to other compilers because they worry about the impact it will have on their legacy um, code bases of all the different libraries they've built. So with the uh, last uh, chapter here, we go into containers, queues, which is the classic stuff you'll see in Python, the different types of uh, data structures, maps, stacks, queues, and then it gets into iterators, which is the better way to handle C++ in the modern way. But you got to know which type of data structure you want to use, what kind of data type, and it will help you minimize any form of memory leakage or crashes, mysterious crashes. But again, that can happen from the standard library point of view, and you wouldn't know how to get around that as well if you totally depend on STL or standard library alone and or exclusively. So you got to be careful there. Um, and Parallel algorithms not really see. So what it's saying here on the algorithm side, this book only shows you the high level of using uh, C++, best practice on what data operation, what data handling, and what type of data structure. This book is excellent for that. But here, if you are, and it only emphasizes the standard library, it doesn't go into any other third party library at all, which is a good thing. But it does mention algorithms. But if you want to know the standard library, what it contains, so this book says that standard library has 100 different types of algorithms alone. So you got to now go through another separate book to learn what the STL standard library offers in C++. And there's only two examples they use: the sorting algorithm and parallel algorithms. So when it comes to parallelism, there's other libraries you can use, blah blah blah. So it's a lot here. But this book covers it quite well. Um, but as I said, I think if you're new to programming, bone up on your Python, understand the basics when it comes to basic data handling. As I said, your different stacks, queues, stacks, queues, sets, maps, and then get into iterators because Python's very good at that. And then at the other end, on the data front, the memory and handling memory, learn C, as that book I just showed you. Again, that is the C programming language. Now, these are the sort of things I could recommend. If you want to learn more on how I'm applying stuff, just go to quantlabsnet.com, go into the Learn tab, and just sign up. And then if you want, you can see how complicated uh, C++ is used in a high frequency trading environment because I created a whole ebook on that. And this is just now the beginning of how to use these methodologies using C++. And as explained in this video, it does explain the difference between the old way, legacy way of using memory and processing memory and data within C and C++. And then there's a modern way using the dynamic memory uh, functions used from the standard library. Other than that, thank you very much for uh, listening to this review. As I said, it's a great book to start with. But if you're really zero knowledge, this book can overwhelm you unless you're willing to understand the concepts of the memory handling, data operations, because that's critical on how C++ is built. And as I said earlier, you cannot rely just on the dynamic memory ways of doing it within the standard library. Over and out. Thanks for watching. Have a good